Neural Entanglement, Chapter 1, The Complement. Lieutenant Commander Anthony Lawrence adjusted his dark steel combat vest, the material clinging uncomfortably to his muscular frame as he navigated the labyrinth corridors of the Galactic Coalition starship Asteria. 3 weeks aboard this vessel, and he still felt like a fish out of water, the lone human in a sea of alien species. "Damn translator," he muttered, tapping the small device pinned to his collar. The thing had been glitching since yesterday, occasionally spitting out nonsensical translations that had already earned him confused looks from several crew members. As he rounded the corner toward the mess hall, he nearly collided with a slender figure. Quick reflexes allowed him to sidestep at the last moment, his broad shoulders barely missing the doorframe. "Whoa, I'm sorry about that," Anthony said, his deep voice echoing slightly in the corridor. Before him stood one of the Nye crew members, a humanoid female with striking turquoise skin that shimmered under the ship's lighting. Her most distinctive feature was the collection of elegant tentacle-like appendages that cascaded from her head like hair, flowing past her shoulders in an almost hypnotic pattern. Her large, expressive blue eyes widened slightly at his sudden appearance. "Lieutenant Thalia," he acknowledged, with a nod, recognizing her from the bridge crew. "Heading to mess?" "Commander Lawrence," she replied, with a formal nod. Her voice had that distinctive melodic quality that all Nissians possessed. "Yes, I was just about to have my midday meal." Anthony had been making a concerted effort to be friendly with the alien crew members, part of his unofficial mission as the first human liaison officer in this sector. The Coalition brass had made it abundantly clear that his performance would determine whether more humans would be assigned to these deep space postings. As they walked together toward the mess hall, Anthony noticed Thalia's tentacles seemed to be arranged differently than usual, more intricate, with subtle iridescent highlights catching the light. Seeking to break the awkward silence and demonstrate his cultural awareness, Anthony cleared his throat. "Your tentacles look great today," he said with a friendly smile. "Did you do something different with them?" The effect was instantaneous and bewildering. Thalia stopped dead in her tracks, her entire body going rigid. Her blue eyes widened to an almost comical degree, and her mouth fell slightly open. The tentacles themselves seemed to ripple with a wave of color, fleshing a deeper turquoise with hints of purple. What did you say?" her voice asked, barely above a whisper. Anthony felt his stomach drop. Clearly he'd said something wrong, very wrong. Judging by her reaction, he mentally cursed his malfunctioning translator. "I, just meant that He gestured vaguely toward her head. "They look nice today. Different in a good way." He was rambling now, desperately trying to recover from whatever faux pas he'd committed. A small crowd of alien crew members had paused in the corridor, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Anthony noticed several Nerians exchanging meaningful glances, while a squat reptilian Duran engineer was making no attempt to hide his amusement. "Commander Lawrence," Thalia finally said, her voice now oddly formal, "I think we should discuss this in private." Without waiting for his response, she turned and walked briskly towards a nearby conference room, her tentacles now pulsing with alternating bands of turquoise and deep violet. Anthony followed, acutely aware of the stairs trailing behind them. As the door slid shut behind him, he ran a hand through his short dark hair, his thick beard doing little to hide his grimace. Look, I clearly said something inappropriate, and I apologize. My translator's been on the fritz. You said my tentacles look great today, Thalia interrupted, her voice strangely calm now. Yes, and I'm sorry if that was offensive in your culture. I was just trying to... It wasn't offensive, she said, cutting him off again. But do you understand what you actually said to me? Anthony frowned. Apparently not. Thalia's tentacles rippled again. He could swear they were arranged in a pattern that somehow conveyed embarrassment. In my language, she began, the phrase you used, what your translator converted, doesn't mean what you think it means. She paused, seeming to search for the right words. The closest translation would be, your reproductive appendages appear ready for the mating ritual. Anthony felt the blood drain from his face, and then rush back with a vengeance. Oh, he breathed. I wasn't... Furthermore, she continued, her voice taking on an educational tone that somehow made the situation even more mortifying. Such a declaration is traditionally only made by someone who is formally expressing romantic interest and a desire to enter into a committed relationship. Anthony wanted nothing more than for the deck to open up and eject him into the cold vacuum of space. Thalia, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. My translator must have... To his surprise, a sound like tinkling bells filled the room. It took him a moment to realize that Thalia was laughing. Your face, she managed between peals of laughter. I've never seen a human turn that particular shade of red before. Despite his embarrassment, Anthony found himself chuckling. Well, I'm glad one of us is enjoying this. Her laughter subsided, but her eyes still sparkled with amusement. It's quite all right, Commander. Cultural misunderstandings are to be expected. Though I must say, this is certainly one for the record books. Please call me Anthony, he said, relief washing over him. And I'll be getting a new translator immediately. Anthony, she replied, the name sounding exotic in her melodic voice. And you may call me Thalia. As they exited the conference room, Anthony was acutely aware of the story his linguistic blunder would likely be all over the ship by the end of the day. But somehow, looking at Thalia's amused expression, he couldn't bring himself to care too much. What he didn't notice was the speculative glances from the other Narians as they walked past, or the way Thalia's tentacles continued to pulse with that distinctive violent hue, a color that had he known Narian physiology better, would have told him volumes about her actual reactions to his accidental proposition. By the next morning, Anthony's linguistic blunder had spread through the Asteria faster than a plasma leak. He couldn't walk 10 steps without catching alien crew members whispering and glancing in his direction, and some even had the audacity to wink at him. At least he assumed those strange eye movements were the alien equivalent of winking. I see your mating proposal is the talk of the ship, remarked Commander Drake. The Asteria's burly Arcturian first officer. As Anthony entered the bridge, his gravelly voice carried just enough volume to ensure everyone heard. Anthony fought the urge to groan. It was a translator malfunction, sir. Of course it was. Drake replied with what passed for an Arthurian smile, a frightening display of serrated teeth, just like when I accidentally challenged the Relian ambassador to a death duel instead of complimenting his ceremonial robes. The bridge crew barely contained their amusement as Anthony took his station. He noticed Thalia at her console, studiously avoiding eye contact, the tips of her tentacles flushed with that same violent hue he'd noticed yesterday. When his shift ended, Anthony was surprised to find Thalia waiting for him in the corridor. Commander Anthony, she corrected herself. I thought perhaps we could talk? He nodded, acutely aware of the curious glances passing from the crew members. Lead the way. They ended up in one of the ship's observation lounges, mercifully empty at this hour. The vast panorama of the stars stretched before them, the ship's warp field creating subtle distortions at the edges of the viewport. I want to apologize, Thalia said as they settled into their seats. I should have been more discreet about our misunderstanding. Don't worry about it. I'll survive the scandal, he grinned and then added, I've been reading up on Narian physiology. Those color shifts, your neural filaments, their electromagnetic fields? Yes, she said, her expression brightening. They communicate emotional states, intent, and even sensory feedback. Electromagnetic fields, very faint, but detectable to other Narians. That's remarkable, he said, genuinely impressed. So when they change color like that, he gestured to the violet hue still visible at their tips. What does that mean? Thalia's eyes widened slightly, and the violet deepened. That's lesson 10. Perhaps let's start with the basics. For the next hour, she explained Narian customs, formal greetings, dining etiquette, and the complex social hierarchy based on neural filament patterns. Anthony found himself leaning closer as she spoke, captivated not just by the information, but by her animated way of explaining things. What about human customs? She asked, eventually. I've studied your species, but there's only so much one can learn from data files. What would you like to know? Anthony smiled. Your facial hair, she said, gesturing to his beard. Is it similar to our neural filaments? Does it serve a sensory function? He chuckled. Not exactly. It's mostly decorative these days, though it evolved for the protection and warmth originally. May I? She asked, raising a slender hand. Anthony nodded, suddenly very aware of his heartbeat. Her touch was feather-light as she ran her fingers through his beard, her skin surprisingly warm against his. Fascinating texture, she murmured, her face closer to his than strictly necessary for scientific observation. Much coarser than neural filaments. And much less sensitive, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Her eyes met his, and something unspoken passed between them. Her hand lingered on his jaw a moment longer before she withdrew it. I think I understand why humans touch so much now, she said softly. There's information in it that can't be conveyed any other way. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Anthony found himself wondering what it would be like to kiss someone with turquoise skin, whether her lips would feel like the same as a human's. The moment was shattered by the ship's intercom. Lieutenant Thalia to Xenobiology. Lieutenant Thalia to Xenobiology. She sighed, the sound musical even in its frustration. Duty calls. As she rose to leave, Anthony found himself saying, Same time tomorrow for lesson 2? Thalia paused at the door, her neural filaments now pulsating with bands of blue and violet. I'd like that. And Anthony, you might want to read up on what violet means in Narian physiology before then. With that cryptic statement, she was gone, leaving Anthony staring after her with a mixture of confusion and anticipation. He immediately pulled out his datapad and searched the ship's database for information on Narian neural filament coloration. When he found the entry for Violet, his eyes widened. A slow smile spread across his face. According to the database, Violet was the color of attraction, interest, and desire. "I've been invited to what?" Anthony stated. Captain Runera, the Asteria's Therian commander, whose eyes blinked at him in perfect synchronization. "A formal reception at the Narian embassy on Proxima Station," she repeated, her translator rendering her clicking speech into standard. "We're docking for the resupply tomorrow, and the Narian ambassador specifically requested your presence." Anthony shifted uncomfortably. "May I ask why, Captain?" "Apparently the news of your cultural exchange with Lieutenant Thalia has reached diplomatic channels." The captain's mouthparts twitched in what Anthony had learned was amusement. "The ambassador is her maternal progenitor's sibling, what humans might call an uncle." Anthony felt blood drain from his face. "Her uncle is the ambassador?" "Indeed, and he seems quite interested in meeting the human who has initiated pre-bonding rituals with his niece." I didn't," Anthony stammered, then collected himself. "Captain, it was a translator malfunction." "So I've heard," she replied dryly. "Nevertheless, declining would cause significant diplomatic offense. Lieutenant Thalia will accompany you, of course." As if on cue, the bridge door slid open and Thalia entered, her neural filaments arranged in an intricate formal pattern with delicate silver ornaments woven through. The sight momentarily robbed Anthony of speech. "Lieutenant Thalia reporting as ordered, Captain," she said, her eyes briefly meeting Anthony's. "I've just informed Commander Lawrence of your uncle's invitation," Captain Renera said. "I trust you can help him navigate the appropriate protocols." "Of course, Captain." Was it his imagination, or did Thalia look slightly embarrassed? After the captain dismissed them, they walked silently towards the turbolift. Once inside, Thalia turned to him. "I'm sorry," she said. "I had no idea my uncle would hear about this. Narian family networks are extensive." Anthony ran a hand through his hair. "So what exactly does he think is happening between us?" Her neural filaments rippled with bands of blue embarrassment. He now knew. "What you accidentally said to me would have been considered the first stage of a formal courtship. My uncle likely believes we are exploring compatibility." "And if we show up and say it was all a misunderstanding?" Thalia's filaments darkened. "It would be seen as you rejecting me after a public declaration. My social status would be affected." Anthony leaned against the turbolift wall. So we're damned if we do, damned if we don't." "There's a third option," she said quietly. "We could not clarify the situation immediately, attend as if we are indeed exploring a potential bond. It would only be for one evening." The turbolift's doors opened, but neither moved to exit. "You'd be willing to do that?" Anthony asked, studying her face. "It would be the path of least complication," she replied, though her neural filaments were now pulsating with that telling violent hue. The next evening found them approaching the Narian embassy on Proxima Station. Thalia was resplendent in flowing robes of deep blue that complemented her turquoise skin. Anthony wore his formal coalition uniform, which Thalia had assured him would be appropriate. Remember, she murmured as they approached the entrance, physical contact between potential bondmates is expected to be minimal and dignified in public. A hand on the arm or shoulder is acceptable. Anything more would be considered inappropriate. Understood, Anthony replied, offering his arm in what he hoped was an appropriately dignified manner. She placed her hand on his forearm, her touch sending an unexpected warmth through him, despite the formality of the gesture. The embassy interior was a marvel of organic architecture, with walls that seemed to flow like liquid and ceilings that rippled with bioluminescent patterns. Naians of various ages moved through the space with fluid grace, their neural filaments adorned with ornaments that Anthony now understood indicated social status and family lineage. Thalia, a distinguished Narian male, approached, his neural filaments arranged in an elaborate pattern similar to Thalia's. And this must be the human who has been causing such a stir. Uncle Narius, Thalia greeted him with a formal gesture. May I present Lieutenant Commander Anthony Lawrence of Earth. Anthony, this is Ambassador Narius, my maternal progenitor sibling. Anthony executed the Narian greeting Thalia had taught him, a subtle inclination of the head with hands pressed together. Ambassador, it's an honor. The honor is mine, Narius replied, studying Anthony with undisguised curiosity. You're the first human to initiate bonding rituals with a Narian. Quite historic. Anthony felt Thalia's grip tighten slightly on his arm. I find your niece's company enlightening, he said carefully. As she finds yours clearly, Narius observed, his gaze dropping to where Thalia's hand rested on Anthony's arm. Come, you must meet the others. There's considerable interest in your potential union. As they moved through the gathering, Anthony became acutely aware of the stares and whispers following them. Thalia remained close, occasionally translating cultural nuances the universal translator missed. They're discussing your physical attributes, she whispered after one group of elderly Narians had finished examining Anthony with unabashed interest. They're impressed by your musculature. Narian males are typically more slender. Should I be flattered or uncomfortable? He murmured back. Both, she replied with a musical laugh that drew even more attention. The evening progressed with a series of formal introduction, ritual exchanges that left Anthony's head spinning. Through it all, Thalia remained a constant presence at his side, her hand rarely leaving his arm. He found himself increasingly aware of each touch, each moment their bodies drew close. During a momentary respite, they found themselves alone in a small alcove, overlooking the station's spectacular view of a nearby nebula. You're doing remarkably well, Thalia said, her voice soft. My family is impressed. I'm just following your lead, he replied. Honestly, though, I'm not sure how much longer I can keep up the charade. Her neural filaments pulsed with a complex pattern he couldn't interpret. Is it entirely a charade, Anthony? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Before he could respond, Ambassador Narius appeared at the entrance to their alcove. Ah, there you are, he said, his tone knowing. I hate to interrupt, but the bonding dance is about to begin. As our honored guest, you're expected to participate. Anthony looked at Thalia in alarm. Bonding dance? Her neural filaments flushed a deep violet. It's traditional for couples exploring compatibility It's rather intimate by Narian standards. How intimate are we talking? Anthony asked as they followed Narius back to the main hall. You'll need to touch my neural filaments, she whispered, in public. The significance wasn't lost on him. After their cultural lessons, he knew exactly how sensitive those appendages were, and what that context symbolized in Narian society. As they took their position among other couples, Thalia guided his hands to the proper position, her eyes never leaving his. Just follow my movements, she murmured. And Anthony, that third option I mentioned, I'm beginning to think it might not just be for one evening. The music began. As his fingers gently entwined with her neural filaments, Anthony realized their diplomatic pretense had evolved into something far more genuine and complicated than either had anticipated. The bonding dance was unlike anything Anthony had experienced. His fingers gently caressed Thalia's neural filaments, and he felt them respond, curling around his fingers, pulsing with warmth that seemed to flow directly into his skin. The sensation was electric, intimate in ways that transcended physical touch. Thalia's eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow as they moved together in the intricate patterns of the dance. Around them, other Narian couples performed the same ritual, but Anthony was aware only of Thalia. The subtle changes in her expression, the deepening violet of her neural filaments, the way her body swayed closer to his with each movement. This is, he whispered, struggling to maintain the dignified composure expected in public. Normal? No, she breathed, her voice barely audible. This reaction is unusual, intense. The music built to a crescendo, and as it did, Anthony felt a strange resonance building between them, as if their nervous systems were somehow synchronizing. When the final notes faded, they remained frozen in place, his fingers still entwined in her neural filaments, her hands resting on his shoulders. A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathered Narians. Ambassador Nereus approached, his expression a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. Most impressive, he said, studying them both. Such harmony in a first bonding dance is rare, especially between different species. And that is the end of chapter 1.